A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hey turkeys, it's Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 66, the Thanksgiving episode. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hey, John.
Gobble, gobble, Robert.
Gobble, gobble, right back. It's a wonderful Thanksgiving today that we're not actually taping.
That we're not recording on?
No, we're recording on Tuesday, so people don't think we're weird. Like,
yeah.
Oh my God, they canceled Thanksgiving for their show.
Yeah.
We actually didn't even know if we were going to do one this week, but I'm kind of glad we did because there is we had a full plate really about a lot of stuff. There's been some news, which we'll get to quickly. We got a review of last week's Star Wars Rebels Iron Squadron. And we have, hopefully, I think, well, I don't know how in-depth it's going to be. I don't know how long. We haven't really talked about it. We just took some notes about, both of us have finished James Luceno's Catalyst, which is the, it's the official tie-in prequel. I don't know if prequel is even the appropriate term, but
I guess so. The Rogue One prequel novel.
Yeah, the Rogue One prequel novel that kind of gets you all orientated, so to speak, when you come into the theater. In December 16th, which has how many days? I meant to write that down. How many days we're away?
Like 24?
23. Okay, 23 days.
Depends on whether you count today as a day.
That's true. I had that problem with somebody at a Best Buy recently about they kept going. I think did I tell the story on the thing where they go, oh, no. This means the 5th. This expires on the 5th. It's the 5th. And I'm like, that's not what it means.
So according to days.2/until/star-wars-rogue-1, we have 23 days, 8 hours, 37 minutes, and 27 seconds until Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Yeah, and see now, I wonder if they're doing that 23 days is the day early in the UK.
No, this is the Friday, December 16th at midnight.
Yeah, because everything. Well, I think everybody knows this because they're jealous that in the UK the tickets have been on sale for a couple days now. I've only heard rumors about the eventual ticket. And this might just be me reporting unsubstantiated rumors, but I think it was Rebel Force Radio had mentioned that they heard that the rumor is the 28th. So right after the holiday that there will be because they're doing some kind of Thanksgiving special on ABC. And I guess there's going to be some Star Wars related stuff. And I think that a lot of people are thinking, well, they've had every trailer imaginable. They've shown clips of things where I'm like, at this point, I feel like I almost know the entire story.
Yeah, I'm done learning more about this movie.
I mean, we were talking right before we started recording that supposedly in Mexico, they are showing certain people like the press or maybe possibly film exhibitors the first 20 minutes of the film, which is not a terribly uncommon thing in the movie business as far as when you're trying to court theater chains. I think it's kind of crazy for a Star Wars movie, which is, traditionally has always been orientated around a lot of a lot of secrecy, a lot of kind of like, let's wait, no spoilers, and then to just release the first 20 minutes, to show it, where basically we know that all it's going to take is some guy to come home and tell his kid, or to get on Twitter or whatever, and it's probably... So I guess we should be probably pretty sure there's not any huge Star Wars reveals in the first 20 minutes, aside from the story itself.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Maybe I did hear that they showed the first 10 minutes of The Force Awakens to somebody back when that was out. Maybe I'm
right. Yeah.
Somebody claimed that, what did they say? It was the headline.
Well, they said, I think someone at one point they said, okay, all of the footage you've seen in trailers and stuff and the rumors you've heard, that's just the first 10 minutes of the movie. I think at some point they said that. Okay. So but I don't remember if that was Lucasfilm saying that or if that was like someone who had seen the movie saying that.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is about the articles is like the headlines are like, the mystery box has been smashed, and I'm like, the mystery box is a J.J. Abrams thing, and he's not I don't think he's a producer on this film, is he?
No, I don't believe so.
He's a producer
but also too. Right, they may be treating these anthology, a Star Wars story movies differently, and while we are certainly, or those who are paying attention, are learning some things about Episode 8, I think they're still trying to keep stuff about Episode 8 a secret as much as they can. And he is a producer on Episode 8, so maybe you can attribute that to him. But I think also they're probably treating, especially because this is the first Star Wars movie that's, falls outside of that, episode numbering, and it's kind of an experiment, and they're just trying to see this and see how it goes. I think they're probably releasing maybe a little more information to get everyone kind of used to the idea and be very clear that like, okay, no, this isn't Episode 8. This isn't like an episode 4.5. Like, this is its own thing. And here's what it is, and here's what it's about, so that you're not confused about Episode 7 and Episode 8 and Episode 9. But that's my sense of it. I could be way off on that though.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes me, it makes me wonder, like, at what aspect of this production did people really honestly sit down and go, so, like, how much customer confusion are we going to have about this movie? Do people, I'm sure there's always going to be that. I mean, I remember being a very, very young and getting, like, the comic. I think I actually got the comic before I saw Close Encounters. Mm-hmm. And, like, they actually, if you look in the comic book, like they list what I don't know who came up with the encountered numbers, what account. And I'm like, oh, so there's like 2 other movies before this one? Cause it's like, well, this is the 3rd encounter. Where's the first 2 encounters?
Right.
And it didn't really help things that, like, every time, like, at least when I was a kid, every time I saw, Close Encounters, eventually when I did see it, it was always a different version. Mm-hmm. There's some versions where, Neri goes into the ship. There's some where it just ends him walking into the ship. I think there's one that ends with him, like, getting shot out of the ship. I don't know. But I mean, I don't want to get into too much of the business of movie making, because it just doesn't really seem like that interesting. But I will say one thing, that supposedly the prognosticators of box office are estimating $130 million opening, which is called, it's like a strong opening for Christmas time, but it's definitely a much more conservative estimate than when The Force Awakens, which I think was at a $200 million estimate, and I think it surpassed it and made $300 million that first week or whatever. But I mean, they are dealing with something where it's going to be there, like, there will be some consumer confusion or whatnot. But I honestly don't think that Star Wars is so complex that people are going to, I mean, it's not like there's going to be time travel or, I don't know.
Alternate dimensions.
Yeah. I mean,
alternate realities.
Exactly. It's not, I think you got to give people a bit more credit. I mean, the worst possible scenario, someone's going to look over and he's like, no, when is this set? Oh, this is set before the the original Star Wars movie. And they're like, oh, okay. And then that's all you really need to say.
Right.
Let me see. What else is... a quick thing. So while I'm thinking about it, and, you know, your mileage may vary on this. If you're a person like me that likes to wait when you buy things and buy them on sale, I think Best Buy on the Black Friday sale, and you can do this online, so you don't have to, if you're a person who's like, I don't like going in Black Friday.
Cyber Monday is just around the corner.
Exactly. But this, I mean, you can buy stuff on Best Buy and they'll put it on a shelf and you can go get it whenever you want. But if you are interested in playing Battlefront, they basically are, I think it's going to be $20 on Black Friday, and that is the Ultimate Edition, which means you get the base game and what I would consider an essential piece of it, which is all the DLC, which would be including the Scarif tie-in with, you can play as Orson Krennic or Jyn Erso, and I guess it's going to be, I haven't really seen any clips or anything, but the actual DLC will be coming out on December 6th. If you own the season pass, if you don't, then it comes out 2 weeks after. But if that's something that you really want to get into, people, it's probably your best bet, because $20. I mean, I paid $35 just for the DLC. Plus, I paid $60 for the game, which I feel a little bit ripped off. But you know, what are you gonna do? But I'll probably be I'll be playing that at least. I didn't really connect with the Death Star DLC as much as people talked about it. Just because the way they set it up, you have to play as a ship for a couple levels, and then you get to go on the Death Star. And
I see.
The space. We've talked about this. The space combat's really bad, at least for a person that's not an elite game player of any stripe.
Right.
But there's that, and then I guess one of the big news that came over the weekend, I guess, was the casting of Emilia Clarke from Daenerys Stormborn, or Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, has been cast in an unnamed role in the new Han Solo.
She's the female lead, basically.
Okay, she is the female.
I believe that's. I believe the news said she's the female lead in the young Han Solo movie, but I don't think character yet.
Okay.
So some people are like, oh, what if it's Bria Tharson or whatever that character name is?
Oh yeah. Well, so there you have it. So that's another piece of the puzzle of that is the Han Solo movie. I mean, do you have an opinion on this casting?
No, I don't watch Game of Thrones. So okay. Great. If she tested the best with Alden Ehrenreich, and she had the best chemistry of every actress that they looked at with Alden Ehrenreich, great, because that's going to be important. I do think it's a little odd or unfortunate, or however you want to characterize it, that they were, putting forward all these names of non-white actresses and getting people excited about that, and then they're like, "Oh, it's going to be Emilia Clarke," this white lady.
Yeah,
no, which is not I don't have a huge opinion either way of what they should have done, but just that it seems odd for them to really make such strong or I guess really send really strong signals that they were looking in that direction, have like a non-white female lead, and then to not do that. It just seems like they maybe open themselves up to people going, but wait a minute, I thought we were going to get someone different this time. And instead they're going back to the Game of Thrones with this, as I've said, I don't watch Game of Thrones, so I don't really have, I don't have any opinion on Emilia Clarke specifically. I don't think I've seen anything else she's in either. But you have, I take it. So what are your thoughts on
I mean, I'll be honest. When I read it, I was on my iPad, and very gently. I'm not going to overemphasize how I did this, but I literally read the headline and I just threw the iPad onto the couch and I go, "Ah, shit!" And my wife's like, "What?" I go, Emilia Clarke's in the new Han Solo movie. I mean, now here's the thing. I like Game of Thrones. I watch Game of Thrones, and I actually think, like, you know, it's probably one of the better shows on TV right now. That being, you know, it's had some soft seasons, but this 6th season was it's like they rallied, and it became everything. It became what I remember why I had to watch it beforehand. Because, like, the first 2 seasons felt essential, and, like, you know, by the time we get to the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th, it would be, you'd get done with the season, and you go, like, what just happened here? The 6th season, but, I mean, I like her as far as every interview I've ever seen. She seems like a really nice person. She's obviously very attractive and all that, but that doesn't really matter anything well, I mean, it does, because you're a movie star and you have to, you know, people have to say, hey, she's not a very good actor in everything I've seen her in. Now that could be the Daenerys character is kind of more of the character, at least the way I take it. And this is obviously, we won't get deep into Game of Thrones talk, but the way it's played, and I've never read the books, is that a lot of her things is she reacts. It's a reacting kind of thing. It's like other people are talking to her, and then she reacts to that. And so it kind of, she's a queen. She's, you know, a lot of times she's wearing a lot of, like, things where she's not moving around. There's a lot of action. So it's kind of like, there's not a lot of variety. There's not a lot for her to do generally. So it's not like a sum total of her acting skills. So most of my trepidation is actually based off of her turn as Sarah Connor in Terminator Genesis, which came out, and I don't even remember, was it last summer? Or, no, it wasn't last summer. It was like 2 summers ago.
Yeah.
Which is the much maligned, rightly so, you know, 5th Terminator movie.
Sort of trying to reboot the thing.
Yeah, I mean,
sort of, right?
Yeah, and it was, there's a lot of time travel in it. I mean, and she's definitely was kind of, you know, her hands are tied. We're tied in that movie because really she's trying to emulate Linda Hamilton, but not really, because the way the story goes, it's kind of a different character. But it's just, you know, maybe it's the script, maybe it's the directing. It's just, there's some cringe-worthy performances in that movie, and you know, they're not all just from Jai Courtney. You're just like, and like you said, it's they probably put them all up there, and they had them all together in a room, and that was that's the best, you know, chemistry they had. But yeah, I'm a little disappointed because I heard, you know, the grapevine was telling me that Zoe Kravitz was going to be was kind of in the running, and we had talked a little bit about that, as like, oh, is it going to be like a Sana Solo or right. I forget what Sana's actual last name is. I
feel like it also starts with an S, but I can't remember now.
And you know, and to be honest, in this kind of movie, which I think Kathleen Kennedy today in an article was saying it's going to be more of a Western feel, more of a kind of heist movie. So, you know, it's going to be an action. It's not going to be lots of talking in cockpits like Rogue One is supposedly going to.
Right.
It's going to be more of a straight up action film that, you know, so basically all I can judge her is on, you know, Emilia Clarke. Well, I'm still talking about Zoe Kravitz. Let me go back to Zoe Kravitz. That she was in the X-Men First Class, which, I mean, that was kind of a low budget film, but I mean, was good in it. She was in the Mad Max, and she really had a much larger part in that, and I was impressed. You know, it's a tour de force action film, of course,
right? And
it's just Emilia Clarke, she's already kind of been in these action things, and it's not necessarily, I have not been impressed. And it's not, like I said, it's nothing against her. And it's like, yeah, I kind of thought it was like, oh, you know, the list of the people, I think I even saw that, was it Jessica Henwick from Game of Thrones, who actually already plays a character in The Force Awakens, was up for the role. And these are people that are like, you know, they have a physicality to them about, you know, where she's actually a warrior on Game of Thrones. But I mean, you know, oh gosh, I'm blanking on her name. Captain Phasma, you know, she was a warrior and she was, you know, criminally underused in The Force Awakens.
Gwendolyn Christie.
Yeah, Gwendolyn Christie. So there's no indicator that, you know, Emilia's going to necessarily do a bad job.
Yeah, and I should say too, I think I had said, oh, she's going to play the female lead, and that's what was reported. I'm looking back through some of these stories. They just say she's going to be in the movie, and in fact, the StarWars.com, you know, press release just says she's going to round out the cast of characters that Han and Chewie meet on their adventures. So I guess the door is still open for them to announce another lead or not lead, but another supporting actress. You know, for this movie, but it certainly seems like when they say she's going to round out the cast, it sounds like, okay, these are the big name people, right? We have our Han, we have Chewie, we have Orlando, and now we have whoever Emilia Clarke's going to play. You know, and as I mentioned, some folks on Twitter were excited, like, oh, maybe she'll play Bria Tharin, who, you know, was in that, not the original Han Solo trilogy, not the Brian Daley one, but then the AC Crispin Han Solo trilogy. She was kind of Han Solo's off and on love interests there, and that would be fine, I guess. You know, I never thought her character was super interesting in that trilogy. I guess I liked that trilogy of books when I read it when I was much younger, like when it first came out, and like as time passes, I've liked it less and less. But you know, that'd be fine. I don't know. You know, the fact that they brought Saw Gerrera into Rogue One, I guess, opens up these possibilities that they're going to bring in these, you know, characters from other properties, from other media within Star Wars. But it seems a little early for them to just suddenly start grabbing everyone they can from the EU era and like plopping them in these movies. So it's possible that she will play, you know, Bria Tharin, or maybe even, who is that in that original Brian Daley trilogy? There is a woman named Jess, I think.
Oh, I forget. Yeah, it's been so long since I've read those books.
Is that her name?
I mean, I can't imagine that they would be. Do you really feel like they're going to be mining that material? I mean,
I don't. That's the thing. Like, I feel like she's going to be kind of a new original character. But I suppose it's possible that she could be with. But I guess my message would be, don't get your hopes up that she's going to play your favorite Han Solo love interest of choice from the EU. Like, I would be kind of surprised if they hit that so hard. So early in this new canon era, right? I think they want to tell new stories and develop new characters.
Yeah, I think they're kind of, you know, they can do whatever they want basically, because aside from old nerds like us, it's like most people don't, you know, have a concept of where Han Solo was before he showed up in that cantina, and even then it changed. I mean, I think you've probably seen the deleted Cantina extended version where like Han Solo has a girlfriend even. She doesn't have any lines, but she takes off at the like, hey baby, why don't you go get yourself a drink? And then she just disappears. And it's just like, it's interesting. It's like I said, this is not as much as I, you know, make this demonstrative thing where like, you know, what's her face is going to be in this. It's like, I don't really consider this any more of a caution than say, you know, oh, well, I'm not, you know, maybe I'm actually more nervous about, you know, who's directing it, or, you know, you know, and I don't think there's anything here that's like, I think it just seems more and more to me that this Han Solo movie is truly going to be the first kind of new Star Wars movie. I know that sounds
the departure point.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is, you know, even to some people's chagrin, you know, how much The Force Awakens has a, you know, a retread feel. And then, you know, a lot of Rogue One has to do with, you know, being true to what is set up in A New Hope. even to the point I saw like a kind of a little comment on something where Gareth Edwards had said that he got a couple like suggestions from George Lucas while he was on set, and that I definitely took them. And everything he said, he offered, I took. It's kind of like the idea where it's like, oh, he's gonna, I think maybe they should be, these boxes should be over here, and or is it? I think he should be angry because I can't really imagine that George Lucas is sitting around thinking about.
Needs to be faster and more intense.
Exactly. He isn't known as a guy who like has I have a lot of opinion on acting. It's like probably more of like set design or where the camera should be, or well, don't shoot above their head because that's going to cost an extra $100,000 if you have to put in the CGI.
Right.
But like I said, we're kind of really at this strange precipice where it's like, I guess my problem with the, bouncing back to this casting thing is that she's such a familiar face. Emilia Clarke is. I mean, she's obviously going to look very different. I mean, she wears a very ornate wig, and her face is, she's like ultra pale. She's almost like an albino on that. So she's going to look different, but.
And I had not having seen the show, I had to kind of remind myself who she is, and, looking up photos of her. I mean, she does look a little different, with her blonde hair versus brown hair. So they can, and that's even assuming that she's playing a human, but they can do stuff with hair and makeup to give her a slightly different look so that it doesn't just look like her Game of Thrones character is in Star Wars.
Right. And that it's just, I guess this all just comes down to acting ability, and she's not I did a little research, and she's hasn't been in a ton of high profile movies. I mean, Genesis, and she was also in a kind of a romantic movie recently, but that I don't think did particularly well. But I mean, I don't know. There's no reason that she can't surprise everyone and come out. And I'm rooting for her provisionally, I guess is what I'm saying. But yeah, I was kind of more, like I said, I was more of a Zoe Kravitz. I think she's real versatile. Like, have you seen that movie Dope?
No, I've not.
It's definitely, if you have Netflix, it's worth checking out. And she's kind of the, she doesn't have a lot to do in it. She's kind of like she'd be the equivalent of, the girl that the guy pines over the whole movie, but she's, she does get to do some talking and interacting and whatnot. I mean, actually, even one of her co-stars, who I just had her up on my screen, and now I've moved, Kiersey Clemens, was actually in the running as well. But actually, if I look at her IMDb, she's got so much stuff coming out right now. She's probably wasn't even available. I mean, everything from. She's on Transparent. She's on Justice League. She's going to be in the Flash movie. So, in the Flatliners remake. So maybe, maybe at the end of the day, it comes down to who's available. And like you were saying, we don't even know exactly what part or how big of a part. It just might be the fact that, when the Phantom Menace was,
she might be in the movie for 20 minutes as a character who they meet on their adventures, and she has some scenes, and then she helps him out of a scrape, and then we don't see her again.
Yeah, I mean, when the Phantom Menace, when it was in production, and I heard that Terrence Stamp was going to be in it, I was pretty excited. I mean, I know that sounds goofy, but I like Terrence Stamp. I mean,
I would say they've probably learned their lesson after that.
Yeah, I mean, even Terrence Stamp was like, that was a mistake being involved in
I did this, essentially, I got a t-shirt out of this.
Yeah.
I thought I was gonna be the ruler of the universe, and I got like a mug on my way out.
He got the mug. Oh man. And then all of a sudden he's getting into his car, and some PA goes, actually, the mug's got the title of the movie on it. Can you actually give the mug back? We can't have that outside can't have that outside the studio. But yeah, maybe they've learned their lessons. It's a different organization now. Maybe that they don't, make a big deal about someone if they're not going to be a big deal. But who knows? Like I said, I'm trying to be more optimistic about these things. I don't want this to be like a show of like, oh, these guys are haters all the time. It's just, I'm very cautious about these things. And I want these movies to be good. And I think, and to reiterate, I think it was you saying, or maybe somebody else. It was just that, there are people that professionally cast movies and they tend to know what they're doing. But then again, she was in that Terminator movie, which was not,
Right. People professionally cast these movies. At the same time, actors have agents whose job it is to get them parts that they may or may not be suited for. And so,
yes,
I guess we'll find out if she just has a really good agent or if the casting director is good at their job.
Exactly. Anyway, a last thing I'll say is when you watch a Terminator movie and the best actor in it is actually Arnold Schwarzenegger, you got some problems.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2013 or 14 or whenever they shot that movie.
Exactly, and he's he's pretty good in it. The rest of it's a big mess.
Yeah,
but then anyway. I'm not going to talk about that movie anymore. Anyway.
Right. But yeah, so I mean, as someone who doesn't watch Game of Thrones, I guess it's like, yeah, I guess we'll see. Certainly, there were other names out there that I would have been excited about, and this one, and with Emilia Clarke, it's like, all right, I guess we'll see if this works.
Exactly. So next, what do we have? Next, do we want to talk about?
Do you want to talk about the Rogue One stuff, or do you want to say that?
Let's do some Rogue One stuff, and then we'll do Rebels, and then we'll do our review.
Yeah. So, Entertainment Weekly, their Rogue One cover story, I think, came out today, and then Empire Magazine, their Rogue One cover story comes out on Thursday, because they're a UK magazine, and so they have no problems publishing on the American Thanksgiving. So we're getting more and more stories about how the movie was made, and a few more interviews with Kathleen Kennedy about the future of the franchise and expectations for Rogue One, and none of this I don't think is terribly revealing, and the stuff that is revealing, at least me personally, again, I'm at the point where no, I don't want to hear it. I just want to go in where I am now. I don't want to learn anything more before I go see this movie. I don't need to know the name and backstory of some side character that has one scene of dialogue with Diego Luna. I'll just go and watch that scene and be fine with it. So we're getting that, and as part of the Entertainment Weekly, it's essentially they're doing essentially what they did for Episode 7, which is a week-long push of promotion for this movie. So we're getting the cover story, but then in advance of that, here are some photos, and here's an interview with Kathleen Kennedy, or here's a small snippet. Find out what's the one thing that, what's the one movie that Bodhi Rook is, his character is based on, or, stuff like that. So we got some images, some still images from Rogue One. They all look fine. It's a combination of behind the scenes stuff and what I assume are stills from either the movie or maybe footage that got cut. It all looks good. It still looks good. The image of those Death Troopers, those all black Death Troopers with, the very lush green Icelandic landscape behind them is, a very, and then I guess there's some, to emphasize it even more, there's the white moisture evaporator and some white mist along the ground behind them to make the color even more contrasting. There's a shot of an X-wing flying down towards some kind of circular thing. I assume this is part of a shipyard or something, and the planet beneath it, you see lots of islands and archipelagos and land formations, and so that's a neat look. Some of these are things that we've seen in trailers up to now. Some of them are behind the scenes stuff. Some of them are, okay, here's another look at the U-wing while it's flying through what looks like hyperspace. Here's a shot of a very wet Felicity Jones in her costume. Here's Riz Ahmed with some binoculars. Here's another shot of Donnie Yen in action, surrounded by stormtroopers. You know, so it's kind of variations on things that we've seen so far. Nothing too revealing, but at the same time, it is kind of new. It's new content for people to look at. So is there anything either in these images that stood out to you, or just any of the kind of information that we were starting to get out of the Entertainment Weekly story or the Empire magazine stuff?
Well, I'm kind of in that weird spot like you are. I'm kind of like, and I've read some of the captions, and it's like it explains what the X-Wing is doing, and I mean, it's...
Yeah, I should say too, I didn't read any of the text underneath the pictures because I didn't want to.
And some of they kind of talk about.
I'll just look at the photos and say, "Oh yeah, that looks nice."
Yeah, and I won't mention it here for the sake of the 2 or 3 things that won't be spoiled so far this movie. But yeah, the funny thing is the most heat or the most conversation I've seen online, and I'm always kind of lurking in forums online about how people are interpreting this, is a lot of talk about Vader. It's like, you know, and I honestly feel like people are going to be pretty disappointed with Vader in this movie, that he's probably not going to have a lot to do unless it's like either cutting Krennic in half or at the end or whatever, because to explain why he's not at the not in this movie,
not in episode 4
exactly, unless they're going to be like this spring Star Wars the Krennic edition. You know, with like Ben Mendelsohn, like in doorways and things like that, getting coffee, you know,
standing next to Tarkin and Vader, but not having any lines.
Like, I'm going on a vacation.
Yeah.
So there's all these conversations about Vader's costume and whether or not his cape goes over his shoulders or under his shoulders. So, or whether his eyeglasses have, because like the original costume, he had red goggles, and like whether, and of course it's been repeated on Rebels, the Rebels toys, he has red goggles, and he has red goggles in Rogue One, of course. But yeah, that's the most heat I've heard is just people trying to figure out like how close they got it and why they didn't make it exactly the same. Like, well, there's they changed it, but you know, I don't think that's going to be a problem for people unless somebody's going to in the middle of the movie go, his cape didn't look like that, I'm leaving. Get up and walk out. I mean, they've already kind of, I've heard some I mean, the cape thing might be kind of people their attention on it might be have been kind of increased by some rumors about episode 8 that Vader's cape might be part of the plot. I don't know exactly what that means or if that's even true, but there has been some rumblings like, you know, if The Force Awakens was the you know, the helmet of Vader, the cape of Vader will be integrated into Kylo Ren's costume in some way, but I haven't heard any real confirmation. That's just obviously complete speculation. But yeah, and the images look good. I mean, I'm not, I
think
anything.
It's gonna. We've talked about this before, but I think it's going to be a very good-looking movie, if nothing else.
Yeah, I will say the one thing that kind of irks me, and I don't know why it irks me, so it's not even a concern really, is I don't like the way that the AT-ACs look with like both of their doors open or whatever.
Yeah, it's a little awkward.
And maybe they're setting it up for something where somebody's gonna fly through it or something. And
I hadn't even thought of that.
But to me it almost looks like some kid like left his toy kind of. It's like it looks like a toy some way. It's like it's open and it's. I mean, obviously it'll all be explained in 28 days, but if for some reason visually it's kind of like it looks weird that you can see right through them. It makes it, for some reason it looks less real to me, but that might just, I mean, we're talking split second shots here.
Yeah.
We don't even know how, you know, I don't even know if the movie's completed or they're still working on, you know.
I mean, they have a runtime for the movie, so I assume that means it's the final edit has taken place, but
it doesn't mean
I guess you can always tweak things.
Well, they can always they could be rendering special effects up until the day before they send the file.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's like now that everything is IMAX, that digital IMAX or digital projection, it's like they can I don't even know if they ship it on a hard drive, much like the plans, the plans that, the speculation that people have plans that she's walking around with an old SCSI drive from the 90s with a handle on it.
Yeah.
I know at one time that's how they would ship it when they went over to digital, but now with people having, fiber optic internet, that they might be shipping these to like servers or, which has been a real issue because projection, for Force Awakens, it's like the what do they call it? The copy protection or the fraud protection. Some people were complaining about it because it would only unlock, like you couldn't do a test, traditionally projectionists the night before a big premiere would go in and they'd make sure that they'd check the what do you call it, the joins, make sure all the frames are right, that there wasn't any breaks in the film. Now that they don't have to do that, a lot of times it's like they unlock it, the first showing's at 7, it gets unlocked at 6:50, and you don't get time to calibrate the lighting or your stuff. It's all digitized now. So yeah, they could literally be, they could be uploading different sequences, up until like the night before, like,
that's true.
We just we have to fix that. I mean, George did that with, I keep on hearing this about how in Empire that after the first month, they actually changed one of the shots in the last part of the movie to kind of explain the spatial relationship between the Millennium Falcon and the medic bay. So they added a panning shot of the Falcon to the window. So, I mean,
that's right.
It's not like that. This is like, oh, they've never done that. It's not nothing new. I mean, there was not a solidified, I don't think prequels or, special editions. And I don't even think Star Wars had a solidified audio mix for like the first year it was out. It was like depending on where you saw that, if it was on a larger 70 millimeter screen or just your Aunt Beru had a different voice. It might have been a different line here and there. So I don't know. My point is this that I think it's done, but
yeah.
But
I think you're right. There are probably some final effect shots that are being rendered as we speak, even, and they know what it's going to look like. It's just a matter of getting the computer to run it and finalize it. There's never going to be a situation where they have to suddenly like push the release date back because the thing didn't render on time. But at the same time, like, the notion now with all this digital filmmaking and things, the notion of when a movie is, locked and completed, is different than it used to be.
Right.
So you mentioned, just because you mentioned, the IMAX stuff, we found out a couple weeks ago, or maybe less than that, but I don't remember that you and I talked about it, but apparently episode 9 is going to be shot in 65 millimeter, which is essentially, it's essentially made for the new IMAX theaters, I think. I don't really know a whole lot about 65 millimeter versus 35 millimeter versus whatever. So apparently Rian Johnson wanted to shoot episode 8 on 65 millimeter, but there was no film processing facility in the UK who could do it. So now there is one. And so, episode 9 is going to be, in 65 millimeter. And, so according to this is saying, it's a wide, high resolution film gauge. So it's not necessarily IMAX, but when you show the movie in, say, an IMAX theater, the picture will look better than if you shot it somewhere else and then just kind of projected it into IMAX. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Do you care? Are you excited about this new world that Star Wars is moving into of shooting in 65 millimeter, or this is just nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I always look to Star Wars as being kind of at least traditionally was on the vanguard of new film technologies. Not that 65 millimeter is new technology. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously this is all going to be dumped into a digital domain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's that conversation. It's like the idea. It's like, I like to buy records sometimes still when I actually go out and buy music, like physical copies. But then I always think to myself, well, what's the point of buying this on a record? Because this guy recorded it digitally and it was mastered digitally and it was just dumped when it was mastered. Maybe it went back to analog. And I kind of feel that way with these films, because it's like, okay, they got a larger scope of image, and that makes me wonder if that they're like thinking like this, they look at the script and like, this is there's going to be a big space battle. We need expansive vistas. We need that high resolution, which, except for a lot of the Jakku sequences early on in the movie was not really a big, even though that, yes, they have the approaches to, oh God, I forget the name of the planet. Maz Kanata's castle.
Takodana.
There really wasn't like these grand vistas of kind of like, I always think of like David Lean. Did he do? Oh God, T.E. Lawrence movie with Peter O'Toole. That kind of like expansive kind of images. And I mean, I would say that even Gareth Edwards had kind of beat that exciting, expansive use of the camera. He beat J.J. Abrams just in the trailer alone for Rogue One. Even though I've had mixed feelings about how I felt after those trailers, the beautiful shot of that Imperial shuttle flying over the ringed world, which we found out the name of having read Catalyst. That kind of stuff in a 65 millimeter and a thing, it's gonna look great. And so anything that, I guess my point is, anything that bumps up the fidelity is fine, but it just makes me wonder. It's like, how many people are going to get to enjoy this? I mean, I know that there's been controversy in the past about IMAX and fake IMAX, and I'm definitely not a person that knows a lot about cinematography, so I don't know.
Right.
Like when I went and saw it the first time, I saw it in a theater here in Seattle that's considered, was until recently recent history was a second run theater. It was a particularly small screen, and I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it more the first couple times the first time I saw it. And then I saw it in the 3D IMAX and all that, a couple days later, and still enjoyed the initial viewing much more. A good 2D presentation of the film. And I think maybe that's part of what, they're talking. I guess none of these are shot in native 3D. So I guess that's not even really a concern. Right. This is all the 3D is electronically created in post-production. So it's not like with Ridley Scott where he's got two cameras running on set. So, I'm glad they're staying in the analog domain. I think Rogue One was on film, if I'm not mistaken.
It was on 35 millimeter. According to this, it was on 35 millimeter for logistical reasons. I guess episode 8 is on 35 millimeter for logistical reasons. Rogue One is shot on digital 6K resolution large format.
Oh, well,
using Ultra Panavision 7D lenses.
See, I'm completely wrong. That goes to show you.
This is according to Slash Film.
I know nothing about cinematography because
I don't know what any of this means.
The funny thing is, I would say that at least image quality wise is that Gareth or whoever cinematographer is, I should say, was better at capturing the. Like I said, we only have trailers here, so I don't know. We haven't even, and they probably grade it differently for television or for, it's like the idea of like it's mastered for iTunes or whatever. But
yeah,
I think I keep watching The Force Awakens, which is probably a mistake, because it's like sometimes I watch it and I go, this actually isn't as good as I remembered it. And I'm like getting into the scrutinizing the image. And of course I'm watching it on iTunes most of the time. So
right.
Compression and stuff like that. But I like look at the images and I go, this doesn't look like Star Wars the way I remember it and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that's important or not, or maybe I need to like let that go, because going forward, they're not going to, when they eventually they probably will stop using film. But
right.
As far as, looking at the little shots of, Jin walking through what I assume is Jeddah, where it kind of looks like Mos Eisley,
mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, they got it right. It looks right. And whereas I think
right.
The Force Awakens, it doesn't necessarily always look right. So, I mean, I guess it's really the tools and how you use them.
Yeah.
I give you a very long explanation for a very simple question, but
no.
I don't think at the end of the day, I think really it's how it's graded.
Yeah.
Because I found out, when I watched, and I don't think about it but when I watched all those extras for Lord of the Rings, the
mm-hmm.
6 hours of extras that they had on their thing, one of the things I never realized, they talk about how important, even back in the 90s, late 90s, how digital grading was able to keep a consistent image,
right.
it emulates mood, and all that is done in the digital domain. It could be tweaked
mm-hmm.
endlessly to the very end. So maybe film doesn't matter as much as we think it does. Even Rian Johnson's cinematographer wrote a very interesting article talking about his quote recipe for film in the when he wants to do digital. Of course, mm-hmm. Rian Johnson said that's all well and good, but we're shooting in 35, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
But
right.
Who knows? Maybe going forward, that guy's recipe might be, maybe they used a little bit of that in Rogue One.
Yeah, so the only feeling I have about the 65 millimeter after rereading what it is, and I think this may have been more of a danger if Lucas was still in charge, but Lucas, when the special editions came out, he was basically involved in engaging in extortion with movie theaters, right? Where like, okay, either upgrade your sound to this THX technology,
right?
Or you won't be able to show my movies. Maybe it wasn't the special editions, maybe it was earlier than that. But at a certain point, he basically forced every movie theater chain to adopt his sound technology to show his movies. And so, the only maybe thing that makes me a little nervous about hearing that, well, these are going to be shot in 65 millimeter now is, okay, well, is this maybe a move? Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but in like 10 years from now, to only show these Star Wars movies at IMAX theaters, which cost more. And, basically it'll drive the price up to see the Star Wars movies in the theaters. I don't think that is where this is headed, but it's just the one thing. It's like, I wonder if at a certain point, they're going to say, well, we shot these in 65 millimeter. Why would we show them in anything other than this IMAX widescreen format? So I'm with you in that, the best resolution, the best, looking picture possible is great. It's just sort of the implications of maybe how they show these in the future that I'm like, well, why, I want to make sure that they still show these in, regular theaters, which tickets are already going up there, but, that they don't essentially artificially increase the price of Star Wars movie tickets just by requiring that these are shown in IMAX theaters because they're using the 65 millimeter.
Yeah, it's that kind of, and also it comes right down to like aspect ratio, which again, I probably shouldn't even speak on this because I don't even know the proper terminology, but I mean, Star Wars was, so I'm looking this up right now, and it's like it was 2.35 to 1, I guess is the ratio that they use. And if they're all gonna, I don't really understand how 65 millimeter changes that.
Yeah.
Like, is that going to be, because I know that the IMAX sequences, and there was some question when it was being released on Force Awakens, which all Star Wars movies are this ratio. And it's like when the Force Awakens was going to be released, that some of the IMAX sequences were in a different ratio, so it fills the screen. And they were like, well, are they going to release, when they release the DVD, are they going to change? Are they going to substitute those shots for the IMAX shots? Like the Dark Knight Rises, even though it's a 2D movie, if you watch it on Blu-ray, the aspect ratio changes. And then I think Michael Bay filmed the fourth, the Marky Mark Transformers movie. I remember, and I bought it. I shouldn't even admit that, but I bought it in 3D because I was like, I'm not going to see this in the theater, but we had just gotten our 3D TV and we got it. And that anytime he had used IMAX for a sequence, he goes to that IMAX. So as you're watching that movie on a 3D TV, the aspect ratio might change like 3 times in a minute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's
bad.
Frustrating. It was hard. It was kind of like with my old eyes, and I've got these glasses on. It was kind of like I hadn't had a physical reaction to like a film technique since I had seen God, what's the name of the movie? Ewan McGregor's, Nicole Kidman, Moulin Rouge. Oh, which gave me a headache because the first shot is like the cuts or so thing. I literally got like a migraine from it. I had to stop watching it. So I mean, I guess maybe these are physical concerns, but yeah, it's like just make it look like Star Wars, guys. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Right. That reminds me too. Someone posted on Twitter. I guess it was Taken 3 maybe, but there's one of the Taken movies, there's a scene where Liam Neeson like has to jump or, climb over a chain link fence. And there are like 14 cuts in it, like just in that, like essentially what could have been like maybe 2 shots.
I'm not getting up on that. Get my stuff.
But there's up. Because they're cutting it so close and like reverse angles and like from his left side and from his right side, and like this time it's him and this time it's the stunt man and this time it's him again and now this other side, and then like him climbing up and then him going up through the other side and then jumping. Like it's insane how poorly edited it is, or how over edited it is. So yeah, I know what you mean about like just there is kind of a style. Even with now having at least one kind of new director, and now we'll see what Rogue One looks like. But there is sort of a style, at least a design style, and in some ways a photographic style. What the shots look like for Star Wars. And so if they kind of go too far away from that because they can do so many different things in these new film formats, it might. They don't ever want these movies to look too disorienting, I guess, and they run into that danger maybe.
Right, and I mean, I guess we're gonna have to make peace with there might be some experimentation on these movies, especially the spin-off movies. It's so funny because like my concerns, I don't even know if that's something even in Disney's, like they're probably thinking like, well, do I need to have some do I need to please a middle-aged dude, or do I need to please the young people that are gonna like keep coming back and back? And if they go like, geez, this doesn't nearly have as many cuts as Taken 3, it's kind of slow. It's just the idea where it's gonna be like less conversation, more action, more cuts. It's like, well, right. I guess that's kind of.
Well, and like you said, if they use the kind of digital color grading, or if they overuse it in some scenes, kind of like what the DC comics film universe is doing, if they have a director who, goes overboard on that kind of stuff, then it'll look off and it'll look, wrong.
Right.
So, there are some, it doesn't sound like, we're in danger of that happening, but it is certainly, that's the direction that it seems like so many other similar movies are going in. And so, if they hire someone who has experience making those kinds of movies, then they might end up hiring someone who's like, yeah, let's just make the whole thing yellowish, or like, let's make the whole thing kind of blue.
Let's do everything on a Dutch angle, like Roger Christian did
Right.
for Battlefield Earth.
Yeah.
I mean, who actually,
Right. Has a Star Wars pedigree.
he has a Star Wars pedigree. Although I don't blame him for that, because he didn't have a lot of hand. He didn't have much of a hand in that, unfortunately. But it makes me think of one thing that just occurred to me, and this might be kind of going against my own point, is that, when George Lucas handed over his rough cut to Richard Chew and Marcia Lucas, and I forget the third gentleman that edited the original Star Wars, which, obviously
Dwayne Dunham worked on Return of the Jedi a little bit, I think.
Yeah, so, but I'm talking specifically A New Hope or Star Wars is like,
Oh, okay.
that all his temp stuff was movies from like the 40s and 50s. And so it's some way like I'm calling for them to adhere to a editing technique that actually originated, before my own parents were born. And it's like, well, we're going to, how long do they have to emulate? We're getting on to 70-year-old film techniques when people, when filmmaking is a completely almost different medium in a lot of aspects. So it's like, as much as I would like things to not change, I guess I'm going to have to realize, like, yeah, we can't just keep doing this for ad nauseum and use the same kind of, techniques of, he uses dogfight films from, like I said, from like 49 or whatever. And it's like, and if you watch it, it's like shot for shot. It's not like he said, oh, I use this as my template and I just kind of tweaked it. It's like, no, it's a shot. You can actually recut, those old films in with Star Wars, and the timing still works. And the funny thing is, I was watching Star Wars the other day, and it was like, especially the pit gun sequence, about how that's edited in a way that it's like completely, it's like a trick. It's you know what I mean? If you watch it, it's just like, they show a ship and it's like the ship has very, very little, and then they have to establish the spatial relationship. And if you really sit there and like break it apart, it's like, yeah, it's almost like, yeah, this is like a 70-year-old way of doing things. So maybe, I guess I should, in the future going forward, I should be more open to changes. That super fast editing though, man, even 17 years ago was a bit much for me.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to do some Rebels and then get into our thing.
Yeah. Let's talk about Iron Squadron, season 3, episode 7.
So obviously spoilers abound when we're doing these reviews. We're going to assume you've seen it. So if you're, and it's going to be the same with Catalyst. So if you're like, no spoilers, I haven't got to this, you can jump off here and we'll thank you and happy Thanksgiving. But so what's your take? You want to do a synopsis or
Yeah, so Iron Squadron, this is the crew of the Ghost is responding, or Fulcrum, I guess, sent them on a mission to help evacuate some dissidents from a planet. The name of the planet doesn't really matter. My Capo, I think.
Yeah.
So they show up. And they see basically just one YT 2400 freighter, think the Outrider from Shadows of the Empire, just this one ship kind of battling it out with an Imperial transport and a couple of TIEs. And, they're like, oh, we're here to help you. And the crew of this freighter is like, no, we got this. We don't need any help. We're Iron Squadron. We can take care of the Empire ourselves. And it turns out it's 3 kids, maybe roughly the same age as Ezra, maybe a couple of years younger than Ezra, somewhere in that range. It turns out that the pilot of this freighter is Commander Sato's nephew. And his father was killed, and he is basically staying where he grew up and fighting the Empire there. And he's a good pilot, and so they have this trick where it's a freighter, so they have these boxes of cargo magnetically attached to their ship, but really the boxes are full of explosives, and so they have this trick where they get close to the big Imperial ship and they let go of the cargo boxes and then they blow up the ship. But these kids are, very inexperienced, and they they keep thinking that they blew up a Star Destroyer, and then sure enough, an actual Star Destroyer shows up, and they kind of realize that, oh yeah, we can't handle this, so maybe we do need help evacuating. And so then the crew of the Ghost helps the Iron Squadron crew evacuate, except the pilot, Sato's nephew, who has a different last name. I don't remember what it is. Mart Matin, that's what it is. Yeah. He wants to stay and keep fighting the Empire, and then it gets to his ship gets basically, the engine gets destroyed. He's kind of stuck there in space, and so the crew of the Ghost comes back and rescues him, and he rejoins his uncle. And he and the rest of Iron Squadron join up with Phoenix Squadron, I guess, and they are going to fight the Empire together. And that is Iron Squadron. I should note that Mart Matin even kind of looked like Ezra with like a slightly different haircut. And so, it was basically, I read this as like even partially that Bizarro Jerry episode of Seinfeld where Elaine starts hanging out with people who are basically kind of like Jerry, Kramer, and George, except they're very nice. Like that's kind of how I viewed this episode of like, oh, this is like, they meet the Bizarro versions of themselves in some ways, or at least the Bizarro Ezra. And I mean, you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. This episode strikes me as something that they could have skipped this episode entirely, and if you don't watch this episode, you will not have missed anything from season 3. Like it's not clear to me how this actually connects to the overall story arc. The only thing I can think of is that, at the very end, Thrawn shows up with his Star Destroyer, and Commander Sato shows up to, at the end to help his nephew and rescue everyone. And so Thrawn says something like, "Oh, Commander, I was wondering what it would take to get you to come back to my capo." And Commander Sato says, "Well, now you know, Admiral," and then they leave. So, in that sense, it's maybe a little similar to the Hera's Heroes episode where, Thrawn is learning how these rebels, or at least Phoenix Squadron, think and work, and the fact that family is very important to them, and that, they'll kind of, sometimes they'll fight to preserve these family ties, or at least these family ties are very important to them, and maybe that's something he can exploit in the future. But beyond that, I mean, unless they start including the crew of Iron Squadron, the Iron Squadron ship, into future episodes, like I just don't see this going anywhere. Yeah, I mean, and I should say I can't remember the other crew of the Iron Squadron. I can't remember their names either, but it's basically they took the names of Andy Gutierrez, who is the Star Wars like digital content person, and she hosts Rebels Recon and she hosts the Star Wars show. They took her name, and then like the cameraman and the sound guy from Rebels Recon, and just like changed their names around a little bit, and that's who the crew of Iron Squadron is. So it's like people who work at Lucasfilm, people who work on kind of Star Wars Rebels content, and are around the office every day, and that's kind of who these characters are at least named after. I don't think they're inspired by the Lucasfilm employees, but their names are anyway.
Oh, I didn't even know that. And boy,
well, because the female character, it's like Guti Terez or something. I was like, all right, that's Andy Gutierrez. And then Mart Matin, I was like, that sounds very much like Matt Martin. And sure enough, there's like a Matt Martin who works on the Star Wars show and Rebels Recon and stuff. So I assumed that the other John or Jin, I assume that's like, oh, okay, someone's name is very similar to that, and they just like replaced a letter, and that's someone else who works at Lucasfilm in their digital content stuff or whatever. So yeah, that's where these names came from, and it's a little, at least for me, it's a little annoying. It's like, all right, just come up with real names next time.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, you put your friends in the show. And George Lucas did that too, but it was annoying then, and it's annoying now.
Exactly. And it's like, that's not a dig on anybody that works at Rebels Recon. That's fine. It's just kind of funny. It's like it's almost like Disney's trying to be like, we're engaging with the fans. But it's like, no, you're not. You're engaging with your other employees and like naming, it's that I mean, I don't want to go off on things because I like the Star Wars show as much as any other Star Wars fan. It's just kind of funny. It's like a lot of it starting to feel, I mean, obviously the whole point of it is it's self-promotion, but they always try to act like somehow they're not all in the same office building. It's like one week, somebody will make a comment about like, oh, I don't really like this type of character. And then the next week that Andy Gutierrez gets like an entire, outfit, dressed as a Mandalorian. And it's just like, okay. I mean, and then now they're naming characters and they're just doing like a word jumble. And it's like, well, kind of, can you be more coy? Could you like, I don't know.
Right, make it less obvious that
it just seems corny, especially like, and also, I mean, as a Star Wars fan, do you really want to be I can't imagine that deep down they're great. Oh, great, we're actually associated with the worst episode of Rebels, which I might consider this to be in the in the top
it's not
5 worst episodes of Rebels, because it's just like you said, it doesn't. It's not. You don't. Yeah. Okay. There's some episodes that kind of push that goalpost, and it kind of creates it more of a cohesive Star Wars universe. And then there's ones that like, hey, maybe it's more of a character driven thing and you get to learn a little bit, like Zeb. Zeb had 2 good episodes last season where one, he learns about his people, and then the next thing he learns about himself. And that's the kind of stuff that I wanted. And one of the big problems I had with this episode is stuff just happened. Everybody was like a observer of the story, even the people participating in it. It's like, that didn't work. We have to come back. We have to do this. We have to. Right. It's like, okay, so Sato, who's not my favorite character anyway, it's just because it's like he kind of seems like almost like a kind of just a boring, officious, like general character. It's just like, he just stands there and he's kind of gruff, and we don't really know. Okay, well now we find out he's got a nephew. But his interaction with that nephew character doesn't come to like the third act, and
there's no like depth to it. I mean, none of the new characters in this episode, the crew of Iron Squadron, none of them really had any development or depth. I mean, the one character you could say showed like growth in this episode is maybe Ezra, in like the way he talked to them about how you fight versus, the fact that you're fighting the Empire, and the way you fight is important. And, so you could say, okay, well, maybe that shows like Ezra's grown as a character, but even Ezra didn't have that many lines in the show. Like, it just seems so scattered and all over the place. And I didn't know like whether we were supposed to care about Iron Squadron, whether they got saved. Like, there was just no connection with me with any of these characters. And it was kind of hard to care.
Yeah, you dropped out here.
It was hard to care at the end.
Okay,
is what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, to go back, I mean, your assessment of the episode on the 20th is like, this is a cross between a stock weekly sci-fi show and the Bizarro Jerry Seinfeld episode, because it really does that. That episodic television of the 70s kind of thing. It's like, if whether it was Planet of the Apes or Logan's Run, it's like they go into some village and the village is like, they all drink from the, it's a town run by kids, and they don't know that they're all drinking from
that's exactly what I was thinking of.
A poison well, and you have to convince this. I'm not saying that you're not a man. I'm just telling you to stop telling your people to drink out of this poison well.
Right. And Farscape did one of those twe right? Yeah. And I feel like, I'm sure one of the Stargate TV shows did something like that. It's it's a very like we were saying, stock, like weekly sci-fi. Oh, let's have an episode where they run into the civilization run by children. Yeah, and like that's kind of what this felt like.
And they also didn't even really explore it, which, I mean, in a 22-minute episode, I almost feel like this show would be so much better if it was 13 1-hour, 44-minute episodes than these 22 minute, because I feel like they're, just their mandate is not like, let's get this done in 20 minutes. you just don't get a chance to explore anything. It's like, I think this might have been a great opportunity to like, okay, let's find out a little bit more about this Sato guy. Let's find, like, do they have some kind of, did he have a issue with his brother and he doesn't really, he doesn't know how to resolve this, and now his brother's gone, so now he has to resolve it through his nephew. And I mean, there's all these great complex things that they could have done even quickly. It didn't have to be a thing like, oh, it's a full episode just about, relationships. It's just, and then even then adding Thrawn to the mix, it made me realize that this Thrawn thing is kind of a mess in waiting to happen.
There had better be like a really big payoff for this. Because if not, this is a whole lot of nothing.
And unfortunately, I'm getting a little underwhelmed with Mickelson's take. And I've talked a bit about my expectations about the voice and with the audiobooks and stuff. And I understand that it can't be they can't go back to some obscure audiobook for the voice, and they hired this guy to act. But that just kind of like that, I'm going to talk like this all the time. It's just, it just doesn't give me, I mean, they can't really change midstream and all of a sudden make him loud or something. It just shows up, and it's almost like, see, guys, something's going to happen because he's got a whole thing going on behind the scenes that you don't even know about, because he knows what happens before it happens, because he knows what kind of art these people like, or, whatever that. I feel like they're getting away with a lot by just having him appear.
Right. And
for people that aren't intimately involved with this EU stuff, I wonder how they're even reacting to it. If they're just being like, who is this guy? He keeps showing up.
Yeah. I guess it would be worth maybe talking to a young person who was born, after the Thrawn books came out and didn't live through the whole like frenzy of that, and to have this character, and who watches Rebels now and is like, do you care about Thrawn? Like, what are your favorite characters on this show? Like, what do you like about the season? Because, I don't really, it's not clear to me like where all this is going and who exactly all of this, and particularly this episode, like who is this supposed to appeal to? Like, where does this fit in the show? And I mean, you speculated before we started recording, you speculated that this was them prepping for a possible spin-off. I am less, I doubt that that's true, but it does feel very kind of like poochy of them.
Yeah. And now that you're saying that the nomenclature was based off of, internal people, it makes me less apt to think these are characters that they're going to revisit probably ever. But when I was watching it, I was like, is this like Star Wars babies? Is this what they're going to do? It's like they're going to, Disney,
and even younger audience.
Yeah, because I think XD is considered your I don't even know what the proper term. So if you're a young person, don't take the offense. But like, what do they call them? Tweens or whatever? When you're just kind of, you're not, the kid. I mean, Disney XD is kind of like you haven't quite hit puberty, Disney Channel or something like that. But you might be getting that mustache or something kind of. And then like the regular Disney has even more kind of young, like 6 and 7 year old kind of appeal. And I was always thinking like, well, maybe they're thinking about like, oh, if people really like this, maybe we'll do something much more simple with child characters fighting the Empire and not necessarily worrying about tying it into the overall, timeline of Star Wars. It's like they could go, okay, yeah, this is all canon, but they would take great care not to ever have anything added to the canon, aside from these 3 kids and their, kind of dorky robot, protecting their planet. I mean, I don't even really know, at the end, I mean, did they just leave with Sato? I mean, is that now they're off? There's no one to defend their planet or whatever. I mean, they saved the ship, which is kind of like that's why it made me feel like, oh, they're doing something like. I mean, I liked seeing the Outrider, which you mentioned before, which is we've talked about Shadows of the Empire, and even my wife was like, isn't that ship that you were talking about the other day about? Yeah, because I bought some some Shadows of the Empire figures at a toy show this weekend. So.
Well, and so in Rebels Recon this week, Paulo Hidalgo was saying that the way they thought of it was this ship, that particular ship, is basically like the Chevy van of the Star Wars universe, and it's just all over the place. Except you don't really see it all over the place in Star Wars things.
Exactly.
But it was originally designed for the special editions because George Lucas just stuck a bunch of crap in the background and like, yeah, let's just have some more ships flying around. And so they designed it for that. And then when they were doing Shadows of the Empire, roughly around the same time, they just kind of plucked it out of that and gave that to Dash Rendar. So yeah, it's kind of this idea that like, yeah, this ship is just kind of hanging out all over the place. Except we don't see it very often. And when we do, it's in a very like big way, and it's like, oh, this is a big character, or here's an episode of Star Wars Rebels where we're going to make a big deal about the fact that this ship is back. And it's like, well, yeah, like is this just a ship, or should we be making connections to things, or should we get excited about this, or again, what was the point of this episode? It seemed like they just had some stuff that they kind of wanted. They had like spare ideas lying around, and they kind of like all threw them into one episode. They're like, well, we want to bring this ship back, and we need to do something else with Thrawn. And like, what if we have the Bizarro Ezra, like another kid who lost his parents and is fighting the Empire, except he doesn't know how to do it right. And like, what if we have all of these kind of ideas that don't really make up a full episode on their own, and just kind of throw them all together and call it a day? And that's kind of what this felt like to me.
Yeah, and this is my personal opinion about Star Wars, and where they always, whenever they really go wrong, it's mainly because they put kids in it, and it's not that I dislike kids, don't get me wrong, but I feel like since Star Wars is, in the way I see it, is fantasy and it's wish fulfillment, and no kid ever fantasizes about wanting to be a kid in space. You want to be an adult in space. You fantasize about this because in some aspects you think, well, this is what grown-ups do. When, like, I'm talking like when you're 7 and 8 years old. And it's like, if it's, when they try to throw a kid in it, which was a big problem with the Phantom Menace, is that it was really hard for people to be like, kids aren't necessarily emotionally complex, and they had this Anakin who was like a one-note thing, and then like they're expecting like, hey, don't you kids want to be like Anakin? They're like, no, I want to be like Qui-Gon. I want to be, I want to be like even like Padme, who had, was a bit older and had a lot more to do. And I feel like this kind of, they missed a great opportunity to have if they're really interested in like kind of doing some cleanup of the EU and using Rebels to do it. I mean, even since we brought up the Outrider, hey guys, how about some Dash Rendar? Why didn't they bring Dash Rendar? Why couldn't he be like some old kind of, they bring him earlier into the timeline, and maybe he's a Han Solo-ish kind of rogue. I mean, we've had Lando come, but he was not really like a Han Solo character. Lando's his own guy. So there's actually a room in this story for a Han Solo character. Maybe a guy who's like, he's protecting a planet because he's like, this is my planet. And they teach him, I don't know, some story, some concept about selflessness and like fighting for a greater cause, or even, some fun stuff. They could go out and get Kyle Katarn, who, is a video game character in Jan Ors, which a lot of people think that, the characterization of Jin was kind of, based off of Jan Ors. I mean, these video game characters. And that way you don't have to tie them into a big thing where they're there every week. But then it's a nice way to go, hey, we know that you loved all those old EU characters, and they're still kicking around. They're just not necessarily where you think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they introduce these characters that I can't imagine. I mean, I've seen some people on Twitter already change their names to Matt Martlin or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, maybe I'm in the minority right here.
Maybe we're being grumps about this. I don't know.
But I mean, it's so funny. I was saying before we recorded, it's like or maybe I said during the show, I don't remember. But I watched the episode to get ready for the show, and then I got caught up on Walking Dead, which was that episode was very centric Carl episode, who is like a 15, 16-year-old kid with the hair over the eyes and the like, don't tell me what to do kind of attitude. And it's just like, it's like, wow, I don't, maybe it put me in a weird mood because it's like, I don't really need to be remembered of what 15-year-old me was like. And I got like 2 of them in a day, it's like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. And it rubbed me the wrong way. The one thing I will say that I was just thinking about this before is they mention Catalyst. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. What is the name of the spy network that they have on Rebels that Ahsoka was? Fulcrum. So who do you think Fulcrum is? Do you think that they're setting up another big reveal? And
that's a good question.
I have a theory.
Oh.
I think they're gonna, now again, speculation. This is also your same guy that thought that they were gonna do a Muppet Babies with these characters. So
yeah,
grain of salt. Get out the whole shaker. Maybe they're gonna bring Saw Gerrera into this.
Oh, interesting.
Because he keeps popping up in interesting places.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe they worked out something with Forrest Whitaker, little thing. Guy comes in, records a couple lines, and they can tie it all in together. We always wonder how Rogue One will get tied into Rebels eventually, even though they're kind of in a different timeline, I think.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I hadn't thought of who the new Fulcrum might be, but I could be Leia.
It's true.
Because she's already been in Rebels, and she's clearly, working to help her father establish this kind of rebellion and fight against the Empire. She would be old enough that maybe she was aware of Ahsoka's presence, or at least knew that there was a Fulcrum, and maybe she, behind the scenes, in universe, she had an argument with her father about whether she could be Fulcrum or not, and he didn't want her to do it, and she was like, "No, that's the only way I can help," and so maybe she's the new Fulcrum. But you're right, it could.
I'll be
Saw
honest.
Gerrera could be another option too.
Actually, yours sounds way better than mine, to be honest. I almost think like that actually makes a lot of sense, because then that would actually tie in better, because the idea of the anonymity and the using a name, and Ahsoka obviously used a name because she was a Force user and they didn't want people knowing, because she probably was known in the universe maybe, and it's a great way for her to hide. So yeah, I'm almost kind of leaning towards, but maybe we're going up the same tree of the idea that it's probably either a new classic character or a classic character that will be kind of revealed, unless I'm just kind of like, they're just kind of going like, oh, we still have stuff to do, so let's just bring Fulcrum back and not mention who it is. I don't know. It could be that they only bring it up, like they only mention it as like a way to get the plot moving. When they get tired of saying, "Oh, we got a distress call from this planet," and like, "Oh, Fulcrum told us to come here," right?
And it's just a plot device essentially.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we're pretty much done with this episode. I'm
done with this episode the minute I saw it.
Exactly. We've probably talked more about it than it actually took to watch the episode. So
yeah.
So I guess we should get into Catalyst. So again, spoiler, vault rules apply, as they say, or whatever. It's Catalyst. If you haven't read it and you don't want to be spoiled, then again, thanks for listening. But we're just gonna assume that you've read it, or you don't plan on reading it, or you don't care about spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do the synopsis? You're so good at it.
Well, I mean, it's
pretty
large. I can do it. It's so Catalyst is a prequel to Rogue One. It's really kind of the story of Galen Erso and Orson Krennic, and kind of I mean, I'm not really sure who you would call the main character here. It's probably either one of them. Maybe Krennic is the closest thing to a main character, and then you could say the book is sort of about how he manipulates Galen Erso into essentially working on the Death Star laser. I mean, you do spend, not every scene is from Krennic's point of view, and you spend a lot of time with Galen Erso and Lyra Erso, however you pronounce it. And so, it's sort of about, Galen being this kind of genius theoretical scientist who works on crystals, and in the beginning of the book, it's during the Clone Wars, and he is, he and this company he works for have figured out a way to kind of manufacture synthetic kyber crystals as a way to generate energy. And he gets arrested on kind of trumped up charges. Well, the planet he's working on, the separatists take over, and so they kind of arrest everyone. And that's around the time Jyn Erso is born, and so the rest of the book is kind of in that kind of Clone Wars period of Galen sort of not working, and Orson Krennic was an old classmate of his. He's working for what's essentially the Star Wars version of the Army Corps of Engineers, right. As a project supervisor, and he's very good at kind of knowing how to put people in situations where they'll succeed, and to be kind of the director, be the leader of these things. And so it's basically about his kind of seduction of Galen Erso into working on this weapon without actually realizing that it's kind of a weapon until towards the end. And, just kind of having Galen Erso, basically working on him over time to the point where he contributes his research and his knowledge and helps develop the super weapon, that part of the Death Star. That's kind of the core of the book. In there you also you have interactions between Krennic and Tarkin. Vader's in it a little bit, but not a whole lot, and the Emperor is in it, but not a whole lot. You do spend some time with Lyra Erso. Jyn Erso is in the book as a very small child, and you see her kind of her early years of growing up. Most of the book takes place on Coruscant, I think, but because it's a Star Wars book, you go to different exotic planets here and there. I mean, Saw Gerrera makes an appearance. A few other, characters from either previous Luceno novels or other Star Wars properties from that era, put in cameos. There's a smuggler named Haz Obit who is, who Krennic kind of ropes into helping him, and he kind of is in and out of the novel. He's there in the beginning, and then he kind of disappears for a while, and then he comes back in the third act to help the Ursos to some degree. I mean, that's essentially the book. And so the book ends with the Ursos kind of realizing that Galen's been played, and so they escape from Coruscant to a distant planet with the help of Saw Gerrera. And I believe that's essentially, where they leave off. Rogue One's not going to pick up right at the end, but I think that it really does inform a lot of the starting point of Rogue One, of that planet that Iceland is meant to represent. I think that's the planet where they end up at the end of the book. Yeah. And it provides that connection between Jyn Erso and Saw Gerrera and how she ended up with him, and kind of that relationship between Krennic and Galen Erso that is going to be part of this movie. So it's really, I mean, there's a plot to it, and the plot is kind of marginally important, but really it's more in some ways of a character study of particularly Krennic and Galen Erso, and then Lyra Erso to a slightly lesser extent. And sort of who these characters are and what their relationships are to each other, and how they got to the point where they are in Rogue One. Is that a pretty good synopsis? Did I leave?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously
I almost forgot about Haz Obit just because he's really not a very well developed character.
Well, I mean, just as I think your synopsis was fine. I would just say that I would consider this probably one of the first tie-in books, prequel type, read it before you see it kind of thing, where I'd actually say you would gain a lot by picking this up, actually.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm the first one to say, like, no. If I read Labyrinth of Evil back before Revenge of the Sith came out, in 2005, which was
which was also a Luceno prequel novel.
So, and then there was Approaching Storm, which I don't forget who wrote that one, which was the Attack of the Clones novel, and neither one of them were essential. Like I don't think you're going to walk into, if you haven't read this, you're not, oh God, Rogue One won't make any sense. But I think it really does inform probably where we're going to be. It's kind of the story of,
and even Bloodline too. I mean, it certainly came out after Episode 7, so maybe that affects the way I think about it. But as much as I liked Bloodline, I learned a little bit about, okay, this is how they're setting up where the galaxy is at this point in time. But it didn't feel quite as essential to being that prequel to Episode 7 the way that this feels like it really does add something to Rogue One.
Yeah, I mean, Leia, in Bloodline, Leia was Leia. It's not like we, she was an unknown quantity. But yeah, it's the Krennic in the Urso family. It's kind of interesting. It's like Galen Erso and Orson Krennic's relationship is kind of like that, kind of simplified. It's like that Pet Shop Boys song, where it's like, I've got the brains and you've got the look, let's make lots of money kind of thing. Where it's it's a parasitic, honestly, to be honest, it's a symbiotic relationship with some nefarious edges to it. The idea that, Orson Krennic, like a lot of people, that at least how I feel like they've established the Empire, is filled with a lot of officious, opportunistic.
Right. He's ambitious. He wants more kind of power and more recognition for himself.
Yeah. But he's straight up middle. If you look at it, he's straight up middle management. He's always, he's going to be, he's basically going to get choked out by Vader at some point in his career. And that's where he's headed. But when he remembers his old friend from college or from the early days about his, he's really smart, but he's not particularly, he's smart, but he's not particularly bright, I guess is the best way to say it. That he's a man that lives inside his own mind. He tends not to have much of a concern about his life outside of his work, even though he's, he fell in love and had a family. He's, he's sentimental that way. He's not a workaholic necessarily, even though there kind of does establish that Galen Erso does have these weird workaholic tendencies where, I think we've all known people like, Galen Erso, that they're just like, I do this thing and this is what I do. And when I'm not doing it, I'm not particularly good at anything else. It's, and I'll get into maybe some criticisms later on of that characterization, but, I would kind of even though Lyra Erso and Galen are a big part of it, I would actually call this kind of Orson Krennic's book. Yeah, and the fact that he is the locus of the story. He's the
protagonist in that it's his actions that kind of set everything else in motion, and he's the one kind of manipulating everyone else into place.
Yeah, he manipulates even Tarkin in some ways that he realized he's there he's on the ground floor of this post Clone War kind of world, and he's like looking out to see, like, he's benefited greatly from this new regime of the Empire that happens not, around the same time the war ends. So I feel like he's interesting in I think we've all known people like him that, they're very good at spotting talent, but they're not particularly talented themselves. So then they they take it like, oh yeah, let's, you're the smart guy and I'll handle all the business stuff. You just keep coming up with these whatevers. And then you find out that the sad thing is people like that personality of Krennic. It's like, they don't they rarely have the people that they're working with best interest in mind. It's mostly just a way of like, oh, I'm going to use this person, and I will even say that Luceno kind of accepted later on. He was actually pretty good about not making Krennic just this mustache twirling guy. I mean, the one thing I will say is that I was a little disappointed. The characterization, like the histories of the characters, weren't terribly explored in any great detail, except for like maybe brief anecdotes. They don't really get into the overall, it's not a terribly long book, so it's not like they had time for a chapter of like young Orson Krennic and, his having some overbearing father or something.
Right.
I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter because at some point you have to own up to your own decisions in life, and you can't just go, "Oh, I had a terrible childhood. Of course I, manipulate people." So, not that it's a weakness of the book, but it is kind of like there is some superficiality to the character. But yeah, I mean, I benefited from this audiobook because I feel that this guy Jonathan Davis, not from Korn, did a good job of doing these voices and differentiate. Even kind of did the subtle Australian accent. So I honestly didn't have a lot of, and I've already got the image of Krennic in my mind, and the Danish accent of Mikkelsen, kind of he does that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually, of the James Luceno Star Wars novels I've read, I think this is probably the best. I think this is the best written of his Star Wars books, and part of that is because I think his characterization of Krennic is really interesting and really good, and like you said, it's not just kind of one dimensional, and it has these kind of interesting not too many layers, because it's Star Wars and it's, you can only get so complicated. But I mean, I really like kind of the way that Krennic was written in this, and it actually made me pretty excited to see him in the movie. Previously I'd been kind of like, well, who's this guy? And he's not in episode 4, so how much does his character actually matter anyway? And is he certainly believes himself to be very important. And they had Ben Mendelsohn come out at Celebration or whatever and just walk around in his cape and pretend to be this mean guy. And reading this book and reading how Luceno kind of interprets that character and wrote that character, I think he's really interesting. And to kind of see then how he interacts with Galen Erso and interacts with Vader or Tarkin or whomever is going to be interesting, knowing, as you say, kind of having more clarity that he's essentially middle management. And yes, he was in charge of construction on the Death Star, but there are other people above him who, are his boss and who he has to answer to. So that kind of intrigued me too, and made me a little more interested to see what this character is and how Ben Mendelsohn's performance in the movie kind of relates to this character in the book.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's also I kind of, you get this feeling about, and it's hard to characterize exactly how Krennic views Orson. I mean, Orso. What? Urso. Sorry, I'm getting all my vowels in a mess. No, it's hard to see how Krennic actually views a relationship, because it's like, yeah, he is a kind of manipulator and stuff like that. But I don't actually think that there's never a time where he just goes, oh, he's such a dummy. I think there's a kind of a strange, I can't think of a better word, attraction. I don't think there's like a sexual kind of attraction or anything, but there is a kind of like a possessiveness that Krennic has for him, almost of he's like a utility to him, and their friendship is based on that utility. It's like, he does only seem to pop up when he needs him, but there's tons of friendships out in the world that people have had like that. And it's and it kind of evolves a little bit when he talks about, his kind of jealousy about Lyra Lyra's relationship with her husband, and he's kind of like, he starts to speculate about, at first it's very simple. Like there's a quick flashback where he kind of, maybe he sees her. I can't remember the position, whether he's flashing back or he's seeing her all dressed up, very in a very like stereotypically like feminine thing, and he kind of thinks like, oh, I can kind of see what he sees in her or whatever,
right?
And it
right,
goes
but
back.
there is this kind of like protectiveness, or like, oh, she's kind of my rival for his attention, not necessarily his affections, but
Right.
certainly his attention and influence over Galen. And so yeah, there is this kind of interesting rivalry going on between Krennic and Lyra Urso.
Right, and it gets into this idea where it goes beyond this, first it's simple jealousy, it's covetousness, and then it gets much more nefarious where, Krennic openly, at least in his own mind in the story, he starts speculating like, maybe how can I get rid of this woman? How can I get rid of this child? Because there's this thing where it's this tick where he never refers to Jin by name.
Right.
He can't remember her name.
Oh yes, the child.
The child. I mean, he has no time for children, and the only time he ever spends, he gives the child any attention, because they actually interact a lot in Lyra and Krennic later on in the book. That it's like he goes down and like talks to the kid, but it's obviously like, kids can pick up on the fact that like, oh, this guy's a creepoid or whatever.
Right.
It's like, because they contrast it later with Saw Gerrera and I forget the Dracelian guy which for people for
Haz Obit.
Haz Obit for old Star Wars farts, that would be a prune face, which is the prune face figure or whatever, the guy with the eye patch, where they're hanging out a lot in the capital ship in Return of the Jedi. Which I had to look this up. It's not like I knew it off the thing. I grabbed Dracelian. Finally, I look up on Wikipedia, and it's like, oh yeah, it's the prune face guy. Yeah, I mean, he has Jin, who doesn't. I mean, she's a very, very small child. I'd say maybe 3 or 4 at the time of this story. She's just kind of speaking. All she cares about is her toys or whatever. But yeah, it's this idea that Krennic just becomes obsessed, and even when we come to the climax of the story, I mean, Orson is not going to do anything to Urso himself. It's because he needs him to complete this project, right? And so it's like he's never in danger. It's like he's in some ways it almost becomes one of the little sticking points about the story. One, that it starts out I feel it's very low energy at the beginning. Yeah. It takes a while to get going. I was like, the first, maybe first quarter of the book, I was like, oh man, this is really boring. It's officious. It's all about, mining contracts and, like, oh, they're going to go look at rocks. And you're like, oh, what, is this a prequel book? But then it, like I said, it's never a balls out action kind of story. It's it's the closest you're going to get to as a character piece in Star Wars. And Luceno was well known for the one of the better reviewed books of the old EU, which was the Darth Plagueis. Which I don't think had a lot of action in it either. No, but it has a lot of story, a lot of interrelationships. It's, this is his strength. So I think he was a good choice for it. Yeah.
And he has that experience with Cloak of Deception and what's the one you mentioned, the episode 3 prequel novel.
Oh, Labyrinth of Evil?
Yeah, right. So both of those are, prequel novels to movies. And so, he has this experience of, okay, how do I incorporate, how do I kind of tell the stories of these characters leading up to where we see them? And in this case, with Catalyst, he also has to kind of weave in prequel era, Clone Wars types of, like you said, energy production contracts and, the separatist versus the Republic politics and start transitioning and showing how a lot of that stuff, it didn't die with the end of the Clone Wars. That stuff still carried over into the Empire and what the Empire used and how they developed and the politics and the attitudes towards different planets and all that, how the Clone Wars didn't end once, the Empire came to be, right? And so I think he does a good job of trying to weave those two things together. But you're right. In the beginning, the first couple chapters, I was kind of like, so, all right, where's this going? But I think if you stick with it, I mean, it does kind of, the stuff with Galen and Orson Krennic, it does turn into maybe a parallel with, or at least touches on some of the issues surrounding, kind of science and ethics and, science performed in the name of the government and whether science can be neutral, and especially, kind of like the Manhattan Project and the development of atomic energy. And, well, we're developing this as an energy source, but then maybe we could use it as a weapon as well. And scientists' involvement in that and how that gets developed and, create this kind of secluded lab that they work on for these things. It touches on a lot of that. And so Galen Erso in some ways is there's some Robert Oppenheimer in him, but also, some of the other Manhattan Project scientists that were maybe more involved day to day. And so it's kind of an interesting incorporation of those themes and some of that story into Star Wars, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of people have been in the press or whatever of when they talk about this book, they keep hammering on this Oppenheimer. And I mean, I'm no expert on Oppenheimer. I think I read about half that huge biography that came out like 10
American
years.
Prometheus.
Yeah.
It's very good.
It was just, but I mean, it
is a very big, massive biography.
I mean, and Oppenheimer obviously was a man that was plagued with some, personality flaws and perhaps even mental health issues that kind of plagued him his life. And that's definitely not
right. It's not like Galen Erso isn't Robert Oppenheimer, right. But there are elements of Oppenheimer's experiences that get put into the Galen Erso story.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as far as like, you obviously, since you correct me, I mean, Oppenheimer knew what he was doing the whole time, right? I mean, it was basically, yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things in the conceits of the book, which it makes sense. I mean, you have to tell it. It wouldn't have been interesting. They would have had to have drawn out the character more, and it probably would have been a much larger book. And that's not really what Star Wars books are like, of this idea that if you made Galen Erso someone that was complicit into this weaponized, which the Kyber crystal, which is like, at first I was like, when they found out that, they're going to bring up the Kyber crystal. This has been a thing that has existed even in the earliest drafts of the Star Wars, that was going to be the source of the Jedi's power and the thing that the MacGuffin that people would chase. And then it never was developed that way in any of the original Lucas Star Wars books. I don't even think it was ever even mentioned, except in the Splinter of the Mind's Eye. The Kyber crystal was something. But the idea that they mine these living crystals which can't be replicated, which, I mean, that's always like it's the unobtainium or whatever that of the book, the idea. But they don't seem to have a shortage of it. And there's like a lot of kind of, I think it's very deft that they kind of, even though we know the Empire is evil, but they tip it to the characters, Lyra, that, Krennic brings these crystals, and hey, these are about the size of like the ones that they use in lightsabers, and he's like, so what of it? It's like, right. They picked their side. That's right. And I love the way
they're not around anymore, so we get to use their lightsaber crystals now.
Right. And I always think it's kind of interesting that the way that Jedis are handled in this, and even though like later on there's a lot of intimation that Lyra Urso is semi-force sensitive, but not really. I mean,
yeah, she's attuned to the Force, and this was another idea that was kind of interesting in this book, is that like you don't necessarily have to be a Force user in order to be attuned to the Force and to like know that it's there and try to be in touch with it.
Yeah.
Which then, you know, also kind of maybe is a preview of Chirrut Imwe in some ways.
Right. And then, but you know, it's the thing where you were talking about in your Ahsoka review about this new revelation about this corruption of the crystal and that it actually like, you know, takes on the hue of the Force orientation of the user, which also I realized opens up a big problem that, you know, during Revenge of the Sith, if Anakin was absolutely just completely full of rage, killing Jedi, killing children, strangling his wife, you know, trying to kill his best friend, wouldn't that have been evil enough to at least kind of changed his lightsaber?
Yeah, you would think.
Right.
And I was thinking about this too after having read Ahsoka, that, okay, so the Death Star itself, right, the Death Star laser is green, but if they're twisting these huge kyber crystals for evil purposes, you know, how is it the Death Star laser not red?
Right.
Yeah, you know, how is it still green? So that's, you know, and that's very nitpicky, and I don't actually really care about the answer, but
right.
If they're going to go through the trouble of like providing these explanations for why they're red versus green or whatever, then, you know, then you can find like, well, okay, well, that's not consistent with this thing. So,
yeah. Well, and also, you know,
it's just one of those.
Speaking of these kyber crystals, and that's kind of the thing. It's like these ideas of, you know, Urso's experimenting with, he's trying to do different crystals, but there's just nothing beats that kyber. But basically the one that's in the Death Star, supposedly their thing is the size of a boulder. And they've established that they're pretty much indestructible. So it also made me wonder, this isn't really part of a movie, like, well, is the one from the Death Star, like Death Star 1, is that the same one in Death Star 2? Did they go and get it after it got blown up? You know, it's like they keep reusing this boulder. But yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe they undersold the kind of the revelation, like his suspicions that this, what is it, name of the celestial power, it's everything's underneath this like the weapons research. And one thing I kind of glossed, I kind of read this book quickly on audio or whatever. I guess I kind of didn't realize until reading another synopsis to make sure I didn't miss anything, that the whole idea that a lot of this is done outside the knowledge of the Empire. I mean,
yeah, it's so Krennic has some conversation with Mas Amedda,
right?
And Mas Amedda basically tells him, like, yeah, just take care of it, whatever you need to do to get Galen Urso working for us. I don't really want to know the specifics.
Okay,
like,
yeah.
You know, it's kind of that plausible deniability thing, and so, I mean, you know, whether the Emperor himself is aware of how much of this is going on is another question. But I think it's, yeah, you do have some of this, like, yeah, we'll let Tarkin or Krennic or Taggy or whomever else just kind of do their thing and trust that it's in service of the Empire. And if it's not, we'll take care of it later. But we don't really need to know all the details, right? This is a massive bureaucracy. The Emperor can't be as involved day to day, because that defeats the purpose of this. So yeah, whatever you need to do to get Galen Urso in here, fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that they were really, that Luceno is really good about establishing, is this kind of the wheels of government and the wheels of bureaucracy. It's, you know, in some ways that they've had to take a step back in the way they depict this in Star Wars, because if you leave off at the end of episode 6 at Return of the Jedi, you know, basically the Death Star explodes, and that makes people be able to kind of pick up and start throwing stormtroopers and toppling, you know, things, and like, oh, we're all free. And now that they've kind of reorientated this, that no, there was battles, there was a battle of Jakku, there was still remnants that existed post Empire that had certain, you know, used a lot of the equipment, or you know, not the equipment, but kind of took up the mantle. And I kind of like that because like this, it just shows this kind of this machine and how, things like this can happen. And people are just like, I gotta, I'm just mean like, the smugglers or whatever. They're just like, I need a contract. Who's paying? That kind of thing. And the morality does show up later. They do examine that. But it's just when, Obit, I think he starts out as being kind of a less than moral assistant to Krennic about helping him with this, and again,
and I couldn't tell if he was supposed to be the Han Solo of this thing or the Lando of this thing or what, because Krennic initially recruits him because, Obit is a smuggler. He's worked for, he's had contracts for both the Separatists and the Republic essentially. And so, Krennic comes to him and says like, look, if we'll look the other way on you helping the Separatists, if you do this thing for me, or these two things for me, which are, kidnapping some Separatist affiliated scientists and then using them as bait to trade with, to get Galen Erso, to get the Ursos free, and then fly the Ursos, to Coruscant or whatever. And then, later on, he has some, misgivings about what he's done, and he feels bad that he, was a part of having these various planets destroyed, and what Krennic has done, and what he has been a part of. And so he questions that, and he starts working for the good guys, and he, meets up with Saw Gerrera and all that. And so, I didn't think the character really had a whole lot of personality, and so I didn't find him very memorable. But it's clear that he was being set up as like the Han/Lando of this particular story.
So what's your take on Lyra Erso, and what'd you take away from her?
She was interesting. I'm glad that they gave her something to do other than just be Galen's wife / Jin's mother. Part of it's not really her job, but Galen is this kind of genius theoretical thing, and he just scribbles notes all over the place. And so part of what she does is help organize his notes. But then they also show that she had a job when she met Galen, and she, was part of this kind of geographical or topographical group that would go and map out different planets and map out cave systems and things like that. And so she gets to do that in this episode. So you get to, or in this book, I should say. So you get to see her doing things that aren't just be part of the Urso family. Like you get to see her have something of an independent life. But at the same time, I also don't feel like she got developed a whole lot. That's why I said, this is essentially a book about Krennic and then Galen and their relationship, and then Lyra is kind of there to a slightly lesser extent. It's because she's there. She's essentially there to show where Jin came from and to be kind of the voice on Galen's shoulder telling him like, okay, this isn't right. We need to get out of here. But beyond that, I don't know that Luceno did a whole lot that was very interesting with that character.
Yeah, it kind of hovered in that kind of like, the cliche of, with the beautiful mind and oh God, what's the Stephen Hawking movie? The kind of like the long suffering woman who basically gives up herself for her
genius husband.
Her genius husband that's kind of like, and of course the reality is so different than the fiction, because we always find out that, there was actually 3 wives because no human person could put up with a person like this. So like they amalgamate, Jennifer Connelly is actually, I think 3 different women or something like that. And ironically played by Felicity Jones.
Yep.
I think she's an amalgam of 2 different women. But it's just the kind of idea where, I kind of ding it, but like I said, it's a short, it's not a long book. And the idea that a lot of her Force sensitivity, they kind of explain it that maybe her concerns in life, and for the lack of a better term, are more spiritual kind of idea. She's obviously in some ways she's the protector of the family, even though she's not like a physical person. It's not like she's picking up a blaster. Nobody's picking up blasters and sticking in each other's faces in this book, which is kind of nice because the idea that everybody in Star Wars is just a warrior waiting to happen. It's all very not slapsticky, but it's all like, using deceit and tricks to kind of cover your tracks, that kind of thing. I mean, Krennic gets to be, as the story starts to amp up, he, is he the one that kills a bunch of people, has a bunch of stormtroopers shoot a bunch of people? Or is it Tarkin?
So, there are various research installations around, on different planets and working on different elements of the Death Star project. And so, whenever their piece of the project is done, he kind of has them killed,
right, and
or imprisoned so that they don't like tell anyone else what they've been working on or guess what's in the works. So, but there are some planets where, I think they kill a bunch of scientists, and then the other move here is have, Hazobit will get word of some kind of smuggling deal, and bring his goods to the planet. He doesn't know what's in the boxes, and he doesn't ask questions, whatever. And so he drops it off at the planet, and then like immediately afterwards, Krennic's people come in and arrest them, or someone in the Empire arrests them for, stolen goods or
it was like they were going to start a militia or something. And it's like, you guys are, they're separatists. It's a separatist holdout. So they're
right. And so that's the other trick Krennic uses to then the Empire takes over that planet and just uses all of its resources and completely guts the landscape and all of that kind of stuff. So but there are cases I think where Krennic has scientists like killed basically.
Yeah, and they at least I don't agree with his Krennic's take, but or even Tarkin's take, but yeah, I mean they do make that they almost push forward a narrative about the Empire. It's like, well, who cares if we're going to use up some planet that nobody's even living on just because it's considered beautiful, that kind of thing. Like, we have this huge empire that we need. I don't agree with that, but I mean, my point is at least they have a reason. And it's not like, well, because we're evil and we have to do evil things. It's like, yeah, it's the bureaucracy even above the banality of evil they're like, we have this huge project that they're talking about, which is the Death Star, obviously. And they get into some of the speculating about how so much of this gets built. And I think they deftly kind of talk about why, you're seeing some of it at the Revenge of the Sith, but then it takes 20 years. It's like, well, because, they were building it, but then, they had all these setbacks, and when they get the guy, and then the guy escapes, and he leaves the research, but he's the real brains behind it. I mean, he said he took his research, but he also left it because he knew that, it's one thing that at the end of the book, they basically, escape. And what they come up with the idea is that Galen, he goes, I didn't take all my research. I left my research, but because if I did take it, then the entire weight of the Empire would probably be looking for him. They'd be searching now at the end. It's basically Krennic who is he tried to get the best of, and got up the ladder a little bit faster, and what he ends up, and at the end of the book, he's demoted. He's kind of demoralized, and you can I think it's good because it really sets up real nice where their relationship is, and that that shot of Krennic approaching kind of in his dress whites and that kind of pissed off look on his face as the rain hits him on the face, and you're like, okay, well, that really informs that how in some ways Krennic thinks that Urso screwed him, which obviously that's not true, but it speaks a lot to who we're going to be dealing with as an enemy, and it'll be interesting. I kind of hope that they're able to maybe Luceno did this having read the script or having seen earlier performances, and maybe that there'll be some continuity, and it would be really awesome if they could kind of keep this kind of thing going, that, because obviously the what we're seeing in promotional stills is obviously it took a long time, but actually was Jin's probably maybe 7 or 8 by the time in the clips we're looking at. So it's like they were able to get away for a couple years before Krennic shows up and shuts it all down. Who knows what happens with the mom? I mean, there's hints in the trailer that she's been on her own since she was 15. So I don't think it necessarily is resolved right then and there, but it's, like I said, it's one of the few times that I've read a prequel or a pre-story where I really was like, they did this right.
And I'm glad I read this before I saw the movie. Like, this actually helps and adds something. The only other thing I want to say about Lyra, I guess, to go back to that real quick, is because I was thinking of this and why did the father have to be the kind of genius scientist? And this came up too a little bit in that New York Times article from a couple weeks ago, where it was women who are Star Wars fans, and it was about various women who are Star Wars fans and kind of what they think about these new movies and the new canon stuff, and how they're expressing their fandom through podcasts, etc. And one of them made the point that even having this female protagonist, Jyn Erso, like they still make it about her relationship with her father, and that you still don't really have a story in Star Wars that's about someone's relationship with their mother, and how that drives the story. And so I was thinking about, what if they had made Lyra Erso the genius scientist, and Galen was the supportive husband, whatever. I mean, it would change things a little bit. The early scenes where they're in prison, or at least Galen's in prison, and he is allowed to be there during Jin's birth, and there's kind of this party there. That you don't really have that same scene if the main character, if the scientist, the one who's under arrest, is the one also having the baby, right? So you don't. That scene has to play differently, or maybe that you have to lose that scene entirely, and then, how do you handle Jin's birth and the fact that her mother would be the one under arrest, or something else, and then the same thing. There are certain kind of biological mother-daughter bonding issues that if you make the father the genius scientist, that you can kind of avoid and just say, he loves his daughter and he loves playing with her, but then there are some times where he suddenly he realizes that his daughter's in the room. Whereas if the mother was a scientist, I'm sure that does happen where with women and their children, where they're like, oh right, my kid's in the room, but that relationship, those relationships would have to be different, I think, which is not to say that they would be worse or better, but you would probably have to restructure a lot of things. It would cascade, and so you would have to restructure a lot of things in the book and in the relationships between these different characters. And so you probably wouldn't get that fight at the cocktail party or at the class reunion where Galen punches a guy and he gets into a fight with someone who thinks he's not loyal enough to the Empire. If it's the woman, if it's the mother who's the scientist, you would probably have to play that scene differently. And so there's just I like Catalyst a lot, and I like how these characters are written and the relationships to each other and how it feeds into Rogue One. And so I'm okay with the fact that Galen, the father, is the genius scientist, and the mother is just she has a life, but then she's kind of there to support Galen too. I'm okay with that, but I think in the future they may want to start thinking about moving out of that model and okay, so what if we make like the mother the genius scientist, or and I guess maybe we'll see this happen in episode 8 or episode 9, right? If Han Solo's dead, now it's just Ben Solo and his mother who have to kind of work out their relationship to each other. So I didn't love the way that Lyra Urso was portrayed, and I did start thinking about like, well, why couldn't she have been, why couldn't she have been the genius scientist who helps build the Death Star? At the same time, I think if you do that, you have to restructure a lot of other things about the book, and I like the book enough as it is that I'm okay with things being the way they are, with the characters being who they are, at least at this point.
Yeah, I agree, and that crossed my mind too, because it's always like, even sometimes you have to think to yourself like, okay, well, not everything has to be the default setting,
right.
And I don't mean any kind of like that's the right way to do it, but yeah, it's like you said, it's like, hey, just take maybe it adds certain problems. I think you could have told a satisfying story.
Oh yeah,
and Lyra Urso could have been, and now.
Right, it would have been a different story, but it's I didn't mean to imply that like this story wouldn't have been good, but it just would have been different.
Oh, I'm not saying that you were. I'm just saying that's poor choice of words on my part. No, and I hope maybe some of that'll be. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that mother-daughter stuff going on in some of the early stuff in Rogue One. I mean, we've seen that one shot where she holds the. Have you seen that yet, or you're still?
I don't think so.
There is a shot of her interacting with Jyn as a young person, so we know. I mean, she's going to have but I don't know how big of a role. It's kind of like, yeah, it's good to sometimes think like, hey, can we do this differently? And unfortunately, they just kind of maybe stuck to the kind of the default setting. But yeah, going forward, I think that there's obviously kind of, I talked a bit about how one of my big dissatisfaction with Christopher Nolan's Interstellar was that weird father and daughter relationship, this resentment thing that's like going throughout the entire like last half of the movie that just doesn't ring true. And it's kind of like, I was so glad to find it that we're probably not going to have to be dealing with that, like daughter daddy issues. It's like, it's going to be more of a, she's really thinking like, I can save my father if we do this kind of idea, not this idea, I can't believe my father walked out on me kind of attitude, where it's like, she's more proactive and she's like I'm going to do this. I'm not just trying to fix an emotional issue. But I will say that, I mean, just going back to some little nitpicks though, what did you think about like the last chapter, the last couple pages of the book with that mama dada kind of talk?
Oh yeah. So what Robert's referring to, if you haven't read the book, is, the perspective, the point of view shifts in this book around between, Orson Krennic and Galen Erso and Jyn Erso, Lyra Erso and Hazo Bit. Those are kind of the four main points of view. And then suddenly in the last chapter, the very end, it shifts to Jyn Erso's point of view, and she's probably like 3 or 4,
right, something like that
at this point. She might be 5, but yeah, and so it's kind of written in a 4-year-old's thoughts, and so it's a little simpler, and I mean, it's okay. I could have done without it, but at the same time, I understand. Well, Jyn Erso is the main character of this movie, and so it's a way to kind of segue from the story of Galen Erso to now the story of Jyn Erso. You kind of have to shift points of view and kind of show maybe the beginnings of her relationship with Saw Gerrera and all of that. So I kind of understand why it was done. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I understand why it was there at least.
Yeah, it's just the dialogue. They're like the papa this and the mama this, and I like, and he's my
mama,
friend.
Papa.
I like that. It always reminds me of the. Did you ever read The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
No.
See, anytime they had the kid, the kid in the story is Papa, 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 and it's just like, oh, it just kind of brought to mind of like this overuse. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't have any kids, so maybe I just don't know kids well enough to like. That's how kids act, you old grump. But yeah, I mean, I know they wanted to. I think they really wanted to hammer in the fact that Jin and Saw Gerrera are going to have a relationship of affection or something in this new movie, and I think they're just trying to like establish, like, what do you mean they just dropped him off? She just dropped him off on this planet. How does she even remember him? And he gives the communicator if you're ever in trouble. So we know at some point she's going to clip on that. Either Jin or Lyra is going to say something went bad. I'm going to hit the button and get us off this planet kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just a minor nitpick. It was just a weird tone change for being for that book. Yeah. But maybe somebody said, you got to tie it all in. You got to do one from her perspective. People are going to be expecting some Jin in this book.
It could have been the editor's idea. Who knows?
But overall, I would say I give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, I like this book a lot.
So I think that's about all we've got.
Yeah,
we've been
it's
going
a good place
a little
to end.
long. Yeah. So if you
the clap of thunder outside of my house indicates that this is probably a good time to stop recording.
Okay. So if you want to interact with us, you can email us. It's hosts HOSTS at talkingbirdcast.com. We are on Twitter at talkingbirdcast on Twitter. We have www.talkingbirdcast.com, which is our website. We have a Amazon affiliate link. So if you're like, hey man, I'm going to buy that book because they did such a great job of reviewing it. What happens is you use www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. It's like a portal that takes you through into Amazon, and you make your purchase, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. Just kicks a little bit back to your favorite Star Wars podcast, and Amazon does all the kicking back, so it doesn't cost you anything extra, and we always appreciate it when you do. I think that's about it. I want to wish our American listeners a very happy Thanksgiving, and just to our international listeners, just a happy Wednesday or Thursday or whenever you've decided to listen to this. We always appreciate your listens. Do you have anything to add, John?
No, thanks again for listening. Again, our American listeners, enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you all next week.
Yes, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.